Here we are. We are live on Facebook. Good evening, everybody. Kristy here with the National EMS Museum for a special Thursday edition of Coffee with Doc, and we're super excited about it. And I have Doc here and our guest, Jon Politis from upstate New York or out in Wyoming, depending on what week you catch him. And I can't wait to hear all the stories you guys have to share with us. Over to you, Doc.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Hi, Jon.
Hey, Doc.
Glad to have you with us.
Great to be here.
You are in Colony at the present time, or are you in Wyoming?
I am. No, I'm Colony, Latham, New York. It's in Colony, which is a big town.
You have the difficult task of commuting between upstate New York and Wyoming. Is that correct?
I do. I work as a seasonal ranger in Grand Teton National Park for most of the summer, and
And judging from the piece I got off of Facebook on March 20th, you celebrated your 50th year as a certified EMS professional. Is that correct?
I have, yeah. Where did the time go? It just seemed like yesterday I was leaning against that Cadillac ambulance.
Tell me about what you do currently with EMS upward in upstate New York. What are you doing now?
Well, I'm a retired EMS chief, but that really wouldn't be telling the truth completely. I have a consulting business and I do leadership development training and mostly for frontline supervisors. And I do independent classes that people can take, and I also work with services. I work per diem as a paramedic, and I also work as a seasonal ranger in Grand Teton.
Okay.
Interspersed to all that when I'm home, I'm also a ski patroller. I ski patrol on the weekends and work part-time as a paramedic and have my business. And I've been in the same volunteer fire company for a really long time, and I'm a life member of that, and still a volunteer fireman, still respond to alarms. And Saturday, which was my 50th anniversary of being a EMS provider, I worked a paramedic shift. So
cool.
It was fun.
Cool. Now tell me more about what you do out in Wyoming and what you're planning to do this year. That sounds really exciting.
I work as a ranger paramedic in Grand Teton National Park. And I also work with a group called the Jenny Lake Rangers, which are the backcountry rangers. And I kind of do both things. I'm part of the park's rescue team. And also I'm qualified as a wildland firefighter, structural firefighter, paramedic, helicopter crew member, et cetera. I kind of split my week between providing service in the front country, on patrol and responding to medical calls. And I also spend quite a bit of time in the backcountry. I'm getting to go as part of a group with other rangers to Denali to do a patrol on Denali. So we're going to be my patrol.
For those that aren't familiar, Jon, Denali is where?
Denali is the largest peak in North America, and it's in Alaska. And climbing Denali is a thing because one of the things that people do is they try and climb the tallest peak on each continent. So Denali is the tallest peak in the North American continent. South America, it's Aconcagua. So there's large numbers of parties that are climbing in that particular area, in particular the West Buttress of Denali. So the Park Service has a presence on the mountain and has rangers on patrol, which, so it'll take us, well, my patrol is about 3 weeks long. We'll be flying into Talkeetna, getting prepared, flying to the glacier, and then that's the base camp. And then we ascend a couple of thousand feet, come back down, drop a load there, come back down and sleep, climb back up there, carry that load up another couple of thousand. You kind of inch your way up the mountain, so you don't gain too much altitude too quickly. So there's at 14,000 feet is the fourth camp, and there's a kind of a major operation there with a medical tent and communications tent. And so there's rangers on the lower mountain in the middle, and there's also rangers at high camp, which is about 17. So if we're lucky and there's nobody to be rescued and we have a good weather window and we're all feeling good, we'll get a chance to summit Denali. But our main purpose for being there is to patrol the mountain, make sure the climbers are following park regulations, to make sure that we're there to rescue anybody that, you know, is sick or injured or has a climbing accident. So I've been training. You know, in my summer, I typically hike about 30 to 50 miles a week in the Tetons. And if you're familiar with the range, it's a lot of up. So I'm gaining a lot of up. So when you're hiking that much and doing that much climbing, and you do that for 5 months, when you come home, you can go to the gym as many times of the week as you want, but it's not quite the same as doing that. So in order to sort of maintain my fitness, I pretty much every week go out to the Adirondacks or the White Mountains up in New Hampshire and go climb something. So usually I call it God's gym. I go to God's gym. So my patrol my climb this week, I did 2 mountains called Colvin and Blake, and went over something called Indian Head, and it was about a 17-mile day with about 6,800 feet up and down. So so that's kind of what I do for fun.
Did you say the Rangers maintain a camp at 17,000 feet on Denali?
There's a camp at 17. I mean, it's not permanent, it's tents, right? There's also tents at 14. It's not like a permanent structure, but
Yeah.
the early patrols have to establish those camps as they go up. And and I'm going with another, you know, with another group. I'm going with a whole group of people, and our leader is a mountaineering ranger from Denali who I know, and you know, this is a superb group of people, and I'm, you know, everybody has a role on each patrol, and I'm kind of the medical provider on the patrol, so you know, I'm a pretty experienced paramedic, and
yeah, 14,000 feet and 17,000 feet. That's some significant altitude and some significant oxygen.
It is. Yeah, the summit of Denali is like 20,300. So I'm hoping I can summit, but it's about the journey. So I'm going to be looking forward to the journey, and I'll be sleeping in snow for 3 weeks, and you know, in a tent in snow for 3 weeks. So that's what
very
I'm doing.
Cool stuff. Okay, so when you were very young, 50 years ago, you became an EMT. In fact, you were a graduate of one of the first EMT classes in the state of New York, right?
Yeah, around late 1970 and early 1971, that's when the state started doing those programs. Yeah.
What prompted you to do it initially?
Oh, well, my dad was a volunteer firefighter, was also a skier. At one point said, hey, you know, you're old enough to start chipping in money for your lift tickets. So I was 15 years old, and I realized the ski patrol guys get to ski for free and cut the lift line. So I took first aid training and in 1968, and got on the ski patrol. And through being on the ski patrol, a couple of members of the patrol mentioned that there was this new training program for ambulance personnel. And so naturally, I was a senior in high school at the time, and I sought to get in the program, and they let me in. And so it was really different. There were no numbers issued. There was no state exam. There was none of those things. I mean, you know the era, because you lived through the same thing as well. So So
it was sort of on a whim or out of curiosity that you did it at first?
Well, because I was always interested in, first aid, and my dad was a volunteer firefighter. From being a little boy, anybody who was a classmate of mine from childhood would tell you that I was always enamored with fire trucks and ambulances. So there's never been a time, and I'm 67 years old. I'm still playing with fire trucks and ambulances. So I haven't gotten very far in my life, Dick.
Well, that's not entirely true. Why don't you just tick off some of the positions you have held over the years and now held?
Well, after when I was in college, I worked for a private ambulance company in Albany. I transferred to school in Vermont. I was a part-time call firefighter in Rutland, Vermont. And I also worked for an ambulance service that was run by an undertaker, which often is a joke, but actually the guy who ran it actually did a very good job of running an ambulance service. And I got involved with helping when I was in college with EMT training, which was at the hospital. And in my first real full-time job out of college, I was a firefighter in Burlington, Vermont. And the state at that point in Vermont, it was during the federal EMS grant programs. And, I ended up going.
Those that don't know, that when that started, it was the Emergency Medical Services Systems Act of 1973. There started to be money available, and states were writing grants like crazy.
it was EMS missionary work. It was to it was to go out and spread the gospel of EMS and to EMT training. And I left the fire department which was a real job, to go to work on a grant project. Duh. And I was responsible for EMT training for half of the state, the southern half of the state. So we ended up moving back to the Rutland area where we'd gone to college, and I still continue to work ambulance and work for the EMS program. And then I actually, in 1979, I actually started in the paramedic program in Albany. I commuted back and forth, and I graduated from the program, and they offered me a job running the program I just graduated from. So in 1980, my wife Ruth and I moved to Albany, New York area, in the same town we live in now. And as you remember, back in those days, everybody was, hospitals, nonprofit. There was a lot of people doing paramedic programs, and REMO is the Regional Emergency Medical Organization, and I ran the paramedic program. I did that for about 6 years, and then I left there to go to work for the New York State Department of Health, and I was assistant director of EMS in charge of education. And in 1989, I was hired by Colony, New York, to be the chief of a new department they were creating, which was to consolidate the 6 volunteer rescue squads of Colony into a single municipal department. And I served as their chief until 2010. So it was just not quite 22 years. And then I retired, and I've always had a business on the side doing things like many people. And that for a time I was the conference coordinator for GEMS Communications, and I had a bunch of things that were my side gigs. And in retirement, I just kind of threw myself back into my roots, which was being a paramedic again. And then in graduate school, I realized that there was a huge need for supervisory level boots on the ground leadership training. So I do leadership development training. I have a thing called the Supervisors Boot Camp, which is a pretty modular program, which goes either from 2 to 5 days. And I also do incident management training for frontline supervisors, and I'm pretty busy with that. And then, again, one of my passions, throughout, through the years is, I'm still a skier, a climber, and my hobby has always been skiing and mountaineering and rock climbing and all that stuff. So in the early 90s, my wife asked me what I wanted for my birthday, and I said, I want to go on a climbing trip to the Tetons with my buddies. So we went, and then one thing led to another, and I'm working there. And it's an amazing, park rangers are amazing people, amazing groups of people.
Yeah.
In the park that I work in, Grand Teton, I have a special affection for. I just work with amazing people, and I work with the climbing rangers. My job is not as a climbing ranger. I'm a paramedic, but I get to go on a lot of rescues. Yeah. And I spend a lot of time in the mountains, and I get to just see and do amazing things. I kind of think of it as I'm living a National Geographic special every summer. So,
that's cool. That's a cool way of characterizing what you do over the summer, man. It really is. What you and I were talking about earlier, which I think is rather fascinating, is for want of a better term, the level of education that kids are coming out of school with today that are entering our profession. And one of the things that you mentioned in a recent piece you did on Facebook, which I think had a dramatic impact in our profession, was when Gage and DeSoto showed up on television. We were EMS was sort of unknown to the general public. And then all of a sudden a show called Emergency showed up on television, and Squad 51 and Engine 51, and all of a sudden they realized, hey, there are guys out there that really do this stuff. And I think something I was sharing recently with a friend in the profession is the dramatic increase in the number of kids we saw showing an interest in what we did after that show hit the TV. Was that your experience up in New York?
Absolutely. I think, I mentioned in that thing I did on Facebook, I first started working ambulance and I was completely blown away by the things that I saw and we were doing.
Yeah.
Not always in a good way, I might add,
Yeah.
because it was what we did was pretty crude for the day. But
Yeah.
I had people saying to me, hey, this is a great experience, but you need to move on from this and do something else. And it wasn't until that TV program came on that it really showed that there was going to be a profession in this, and that and you and me and many of the other people watching this and have followed the history of EMS, we were all completely bitten by this EMS bug, or we contracted the virus, and
Yeah.
we just simply went on to. Many people have written books and developed educational programs, and there are just so many things that have happened in every corner of the country. And there was a lot that was happening at the time of that TV show Emergency came out. As there was the Highway Safety Act. There was the orthopedic surgeons were in the trauma docs were looking at it from a trauma perspective. The cardiologists were trying to advance coronary care. But it wasn't until that TV show came on that was the catalyst, that was the accelerator that I think showed everybody what was possible. And for me, I thought, okay, well, I don't know where this is going to happen, but I want to go there. And I think I want to do what I can to make this my career. And I've been doing that for 50 years and I haven't looked back, and it's been great.
Yeah. It's funny. I look back on that period of time. You were well trained in those days if you had taken the Advanced First Aid and Emergency Care White Book course from the Red Cross.
Yeah.
That's really where those of us that got bitten by the bug started. And then there was a conversion process that went on where we became emergency medical technicians, and then 7 years or so later, paramedics.
Right.
So it's been a pretty remarkable ride, and I, like you, have sort of never gotten over it. I just hang in there with it.
Right.
In the piece you put on Facebook recently, I really liked your take on an acronym that's been around for a long time, particularly with the area of things like integrity, not only integrity in going into the patient's home and doing what you need to do, but your characterization of integrity towards those that we work with. You want to share some comments on that?
Well, there's one of the things that I would say are many people coming into the occupation they're astounding, but it's hard to expect somebody who is 19, 20, or 21 years old to say, hey, be professional. We don't really tell anybody what that is. We also don't tell people about what their expectations are. And, if you want to be respected, you have to respect other people. And, one of those things is that part of the integrity thing is people trust you to make good decisions and to know what to do, which means coming to work and checking your equipment. It means getting to work early. If your shift starts at 6 a.m., it doesn't mean getting there at 6 a.m. It means getting there before that. It's working hard to do the right things when nobody's watching. It's, showing up to work on time. It's holding yourself out in a professional manner, your appearance and how you carry yourself and how you communicate with people. And it's, it's a blood sport in many occupations to simply trash talk about others.
Yeah.
But when you do that, really what you're saying is that you're a person that can't be trusted.
Yeah.
If you want to be respected, you have to respect others. And, a simple thing probably mom told you is don't ever talk about somebody unless they're with you. If you wouldn't say it while they're standing there with you, don't say it when they're not there. And that goes to other agencies, the people we work with, but basically, people trust us to come into their homes when they're in their underwear and ask them personal questions and undress them and stick needles in them and paw through their pill bottles and ask them all types of intimate questions.
Yep.
The first impression coming through the door is what you look like. If you look like you come to change the oil in somebody's car,
yep,
you're not creating a good first impression. And so it's the impression when you walk through the door. It's how we speak to people. There's, the rest of the care thing is, compassion and accountability and empathy and, I think the new frontier in our occupation is not the latest airway management device. The frontier is explaining to people and establishing ourselves better as an occupation by our level of professionalism, that people look up to us, that we carry ourselves in. There's certain things that we don't do. I was giving a talk on professionalism at a state conference that I won't mention. And there's a guy who sells t-shirts at many conferences, and one of the t-shirts is a shirt that says EMS here to save your ass, not kiss it. And the truth of the matter is that the occupation of EMS is about a lot more than saving people's lives. It's providing compassionate care to somebody on the worst day of their life.
Yep.
People they don't really remember how much you know. They just want to know that you care. And if you think that your job is just saving lives, you kind of miss the whole thing. So I got up and talked about that. It was in a general session. There was probably 30 people in the audience wearing that t-shirt. I've never been invited back there again. But that's okay with me, because I'm willing to say that. I'm willing to stand up and say, and have the courage to say, that's not right. We shouldn't be holding ourselves out that way.
Yeah.
At the same time, my wife, Ruth, of 43, suited me 44 years as an RN. Somebody gave her a t-shirt, which has looks like it says RN, but it looks like a Superman shield on it. That's a really cool shirt, Ruth. I didn't ever see you wear that in public. She goes, no. In nursing, it would be considered really unethical for us to do that. We don't wear things like this in public.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned compassion, and that's something that I think we learn. Maybe we don't have it initially, but I do. I'm now CISM certified, and I do CISM. And one of the things that I've shared with some young people recently, I said, sometimes the most important thing you're going to do for another human being is hold their hand while they are dying.
Yeah.
And it takes some time. I think it takes some maturity development for folks in our profession to really grasp that and how important that is. It's important not only to the patient that's dying, but it's important to the family members that are there. So
I will tell you that, I come home at the end of a shift, working as a paramedic, and I will tell you that I am just grateful for the life that I have. And I would also say that being an EMT and paramedic today is harder than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Because of the aging of America, we are caring for the elderly. We're dealing with a lot of geriatric issues.
Yep.
And you can get compassion fatigue from having to be compassionate all the time. So you have to have a way to get yourself back into the green zone again, get yourself recharged so you can go back out and do it again another day.
Well, and I think that's where critical incident stress management and its ilk gets to be very important. When you and I started, it was the suck it up buttercup mentality.
Right.
We finally learned that that's not so easy over a period of time. And we need to be supportive of our peers in the profession, because sometimes it kind of eats them up. And I know you and I have both seen that in folks that we have worked with over the years. And you mentioned empathy in your recent comments. Tell me what you mean by empathy that we need to share in our profession.
Well, it's the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And, one of the things that I see very often is I work with a lot of people that are really good, they're very proficient, and they're at the top of their game. And we have a new person who comes in the door as an EMT or paramedic, and we want to eat them alive. They don't know how to do this. They can't do that. Look at that. They got lost going to a call, and yada, yada, yada just goes on.
Yeah.
And, part of this, I guess maybe it's the perspective I have from the years of doing this, but I do remember what it was like on my first day. I was scared to death. And I think we have a responsibility to put ourselves in that new person's shoes, and rather than trash talk them, to help them. A lot of times people will not, because it's easy to talk behind someone's back. They won't say anything to the person. Like they don't like the way they're driving, for example. they don't have enough courage to say something, but when they walk out, they'll criticize them or they'll trash talk that person. Well, how about pulling a person aside and say, hey, look, driving this ambulance is a lot different than driving your car.
Yeah.
And I know it feels okay up in front, but in the back, you're throwing me around. We'll give you some tips on how to smooth this out. It's obviously empathy towards our patients, being able to put ourselves in the person's shoes. But I think one of the things that I certainly see all the time is, as an occupation, we need to do a much better job of helping new people transition into becoming experienced people. And I see a lot of new providers. It's a sport to see what they can do to give somebody a hard time. I'm working with somebody new as an EMT. I'll tell them, hey, listen, I've been doing this a long time. You know that, but
Yep.
I learn something every day, and I'm going to learn about 5 things from you today. Maybe we can share some things. We're on the same team. Let's just communicate. Nothing personal. Let's just keep talking today all day.
Yeah.
It makes it a lot easier for the person you work with. It makes it easier for you. You enjoy coming to work when you look forward to going to work with people,
And look at the quality of professional you end up with if it's done right. I mean, we grow a product that we're proud of.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is critical. And I totally agree with you on that issue about, I guess, one of my favorite sayings always is, I want to walk a mile in your moccasins.
Right.
Put yourself where that kid is, and what can you do to help that individual grow in our profession? And I think that's what you were speaking to a large extent. That's really what we need to do better. Gary Ludwig.
I do, yeah.
Gary recently did a book on leadership. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I've got it somewhere here. But it's amazing what those of us that have been around for a while have learned over the years about nurturing and cultivating our fellow professionals and bringing them along rather than, as you suggested, trash talking them behind their back. That doesn't help anything. Doesn't help us grow. What's your view of where EMS goes in the future?
Well, I think we've done a really good job in our country of clinical development. But what we've done is we have developed outstanding clinical things, but we have not developed outstanding infrastructure. Our delivery systems, we have many EMS systems. You're talking about, some volunteer nonprofit services going out of business. There are still many communities that don't really support their EMS, don't really understand why they need to have a good EMS. And we have to develop and maintain and cultivate sustainable models for providing EMS. It's a huge subject to get into, but to just sort of, the nutshell of it is, well, we've done a great job with clinical education. We haven't really done a great job with a focus on a national level about executive level leadership, mid-level leadership, frontline leadership in developing systems and what it takes to run a system. I haven't been a fire chief. I haven't been an EMS chief. I'll tell you that from an administrative and leadership point of view, being an EMS chief is extremely difficult and a lot more difficult than being a fire chief because of regulatory compliance and billing. And I'm not running down being a fire chief. It's very complicated and it's a dangerous job and et cetera. But I would say that, at a national level, we need leadership in developing leaders for the future. And we need to develop people so they understand what sustainable models are. And then the other thing, as an occupation, I would say the title for our occupation at the beginning was EMT. Unfortunately, that's not a sticky title. And in the minds of the public, it doesn't stick. The word paramedic sticks. And the Canadians and the Brits and the Australians, they've all figured out that we're in the occupation of paramedicine.
Yeah.
And it's basically, this is marketing and branding. They figured it out. They call everybody paramedics, and between themselves, they know, like we do, who's an advanced practice paramedic versus who's a primary care paramedic, or who's an EMT or who's a paramedic. It's the same kind of thing. But to the public, everybody's a paramedic. In Canada, they've even started to go away from calling it EMS and they call them the Toronto Provincial Paramedics or the Ontario Provincial Paramedics.
Right.
And we need to get everybody moving towards that, because what happens on the news is that nobody knows who we are. They call us generic emergency responders. Oh, those very firefighters, cops, and emergency workers. So it's hard for anybody to identify. We spent so much time arguing amongst ourselves about who we are, what our titles are, and who's better, that we've missed the whole branding thing. So the public is confused about who we are and what we do. And if you were to walk up and you were to say to most people in the public, it's important to have a good, good ambulance and EMS or paramedic service, and they'll go, oh my gosh, it is, yeah. But they don't identify with the same level of importance with us as fire and police.
Yeah.
That's our fault. That's our fault, because we haven't sold ourselves like the Canadians and the Brits and the Australians have. And I think in order for our occupation to move forward, we need to solidify around a singular title. We work in the occupation of paramedicine. It has many different offshoots: critical care, transport medicine, helicopter, community medicine. It goes under 911 rescue response. There's a lot of things in the occupation of paramedicine, but it's all within the house of paramedicine. And I think we need to unify around that. Stop arguing amongst ourselves. And I feel as a 50-year guy, I have skin in the game here. I worked hard to be a paramedic, but please call us all paramedics. I'm really not insulted or feel threatened by that term being given away, So
yeah, I guess
anyway,
we have done a very good job telling our story to the general public, have we?
We have not. I mean, the last great big PR thing we had was the TV show Emergency, and we've done a great job with moving ourselves ahead clinically. But sometimes we moved ahead clinically at the expense of developing systems that are not sustainable.
Yeah.
In the 1930s, hospitals began to consolidate out of necessity. There were hospital consolidations, technology changed, everything changed, and it forced hospitals to change. I don't think EMS is any different. I think EMS is going to continue to change. We're going to go through more, and as you know, I live in the Northeast. Every little community has their own service, right?
Yep.
Is that really necessary, or are we just duplicating things? Could we do a better job if we were bigger? Yes. I think the time has come where we have to start looking at more sustainable models of providing emergency services. Yeah. And then the other huge thing in our industry is that volunteerism was really were the missionaries that pushed a lot of EMS development across America. And I don't know a state where EMS volunteerism is not severely challenged, which also develops some new problems, because in many places, I will tell you, particularly in the Northeast and many other places, if you ask most people who are career people in EMS where they came from, they'll say volunteer services. That's how they started. So when you start to eliminate the possibility to volunteer in a community and put your toe in the water, what that does is that has a downstream effect of developing severe manpower supply issues to places that are looking to pay people. And quite honestly, we see that across New York State.
Yeah, we're seeing that all over.
Yeah.
The volunteer services are going away. Getting people to volunteer their time is becoming more and more difficult. You and I talked about that earlier.
And because of that, Doc, because of the decline of volunteerism, and there's fewer people doing it, there's also fewer people available now stepping up to do the paid jobs as well.
Sure.
You can't find any place that hires EMS people that is not searching for people.
Right.
I would say to anybody, this is the best time ever if you're an EMT or paramedic to find, because there are jobs and really good ones everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely correct. I think the sand has run about through the hourglass. Any closing thoughts you want to share, Jon or
Doc? We're a couple of old timers along with many others, and I think we both got a bunch of years left in us, and I plan on being out there for a while longer. And
good.
And this has been a great occupation, and I've had the chance to meet people like you over the years that I respect and admire, and they're just great people doing EMS. EMS is very resilient. Anytime there's a challenge, we've stepped up to the plate. All you have to do is look at what's happened even during this pandemic. EMS was on the front lines of it, but I didn't hear any people booking off sick or going home because they didn't want to take the risk. They were there. I think it's something we should be proud of. So,
Yeah.
I'm proud of the years that I spent in this, and hopefully I've got a few more years doing it. So
Absolutely. I'm sure you do. Enjoy the adventure up on Denali this summer, man. That sounds great.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I have a good patrol, and I'm certainly going with great people, and it's something I've always wanted to do. And then I'll come back. I'll be working in Grand Teton National Park for the rest of the summer. And
Great.
so
Great fun. Thanks again for the time, John.
thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Now
Doc
a
and
word from our
Kristy.
sponsor, Kristy.
Not quite yet a word from our sponsor. You're a very popular guy. There's lots of hands waving in comments and stuff. So give a shout out to your fans that are watching us tonight. John, do you see a role for the museum or any museum, but especially the National EMS Museum, in helping bridge this gap between public understanding of what pre-hospital care providers do and the services and getting people together and what's the role?
Well, I do. I think in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been. And, I don't, when I go to work, I don't sit around talking about, oh, the way it used to be. Nobody wants to hear that stuff. And, but people ask me questions about what was this like? Where did this come from? I think the gift of the EMS museum is it's someplace that people can go. It's virtual, right? It's someplace people can go to learn about how we have developed and where we've come from, to kind of give us some ideas about maybe where we need to go in the future. One of the positive things about EMS is we're good and we're smart and we're resilient. One of the negative things is that EMTs and paramedics are like herding a bunch of cats. There are just times a guy who is a dear friend of mine and many others who are in the Capital District, Ron Baker, passed away. He was a legendary guy in our area, and he used to growl at people every once in a while, and he'd go, "Yeah, you paramedics, you're too smart. Stop being so smart. Why don't you just get together? Why don't you agree on something? Stop being smart." And we would all laugh about that, but it's fundamentally true that sometimes, the fire service and law enforcement, other occupations, they stick together much better. And I think one of the challenges to us is exactly that. But we all go to museums. We love museums. We like to know where we've come from. We want to know about the past. We want to know who came before us. And, I was telling, you and Doc before we started this, every 5 years, this occupation reinvents itself. It totally changes. And it's with free open access medical education and people doing podcasting and YouTubers, and the information exchange is at the speed of the internet. And it's astounding that the generation that's coming along, I think we're in good hands. They're going to take us to the next level. There's no question about it. I think our big challenges are sustainable EMS systems, stick together, branding. We need to come up with a singular title that we can agree on and quit arguing about it. Just get on. In the words of Ron Baker, God rest his soul, "You're being smart. Stop trying to be so smart. Stick together, agree on something." He's right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
very true. Very true.
Well, maybe we're the rallying point then. If every story comes through the National EMS Museum, that's
the funny thing is in EMS, the IAFF, it's the International Firefighter speaks with a unified voice, and usually they and the International Fire Chiefs get together on things. I think the museum can certainly help to be a catalyst to bring people together to get on the same page with things.
Cool.
Help understand where we've come from, help look to where we need to go in the future. In respect. This is the ultimate in respect. We're honoring the people that come from before us.
Yeah.
Every person that comes along, I know you feel this way, Doc. There were so many people that were my mentors that taught me, and that was the genesis of that little thing I wrote on my 50th anniversary. I didn't come up with that stuff. That's all people taught me over the years.
Sure. Sometimes
by being hit in the head by a 2x4, I might add, kids, shut up and smarten up, some people are just born with a gift of all this wisdom.
Prefaced by listen, smart ass.
Well, that's what it is, right? We learn a lot of things along the way, and we still continue to learn. But this whole thing about the museum is about respect. It's about respecting the past, honoring where we are in the present, and looking towards the future.
Right. Wonderful. Thanks again, John. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
And the official word from the sponsor is we are back tomorrow night. I think it's an hour later, an hour earlier. We're on at 5:30 Central, I believe.
Right.
I will post about it in the morning and we'll give you all the login details. And today we've had a fury of emails at the office that, as both Jon and Doc had mentioned, a number of volunteer squads are starting to close their doors because of COVID and some other political issues. So I just really want to make an appeal to you who are watching, you who share this video later on. Please, please help us save the history that is walking out the door now because of COVID. You can reach us directly through emsmuseum.org. We have emails and phone number contact through social media. Let's get this history saved ASAP. So connect us, walk in the stations yourselves if you feel comfortable, and say, hey, there's this museum. Let's get our stuff into the museum so that our history doesn't get lost. My heart was breaking a little bit this morning when I saw the notification. So help us get stuff into the museum. Help us save the stories, because that's really what we're all about. We can't honor you without the stories. So please, please help us out here, coast to coast, Alaska to Hawaii, north to south. And that's it. That is my word for the sponsor this evening. I'll come up with a better one tomorrow night.
Great.
And yeah. Thank you both very much. The dogs decided to wake up, so it must be time to kick off and go find some dinner. Thank you all.
Okay.
We'll see you tomorrow night.
Good night.
Thanks for having me.
Good night, everybody.